Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm super excited to have you tune in again to this Where Will We Go From Here series. My name is Imran Khan, and I'm really excited today to have Whitney Bauman, Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Florida International University. I'm here with us to discuss a little bit of the work that he's been doing on the planetary self and talking a bit about globalization and how it relates to the current crisis. Same as always, we're going to go through the same three questions we always go through. But before we get started, thanks so much, Whitney, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I should also mention that Whitney's my husband. So we are very awkwardly doing this in two different rooms of the same apartment, which is fun. A little Zoom experiment. So yeah, Whitney, do you want to tell us a little bit about the work that you do and help us better understand what the planetary self exactly means?
Sure. So most of the work I do within religious studies is sort of around human identity and how we make meaning out of our lives. And for most humans throughout most of the world, this has been done through religions or through something like a national identity or even a cultural identity. But these are identities that are located in specific places. And so what I'm trying to argue is that rather than having our identity be sort of begin with Christianity or Islam or even American or European or even something more specific or even human, what I want to do is shift that to understand ourselves as sort of evolutionarily and ecologically planetary creatures. We're first and foremost citizens of an entire planet that evolves and thrives or dies together.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And so I think, the first question I always ask the folks that are on the program is, well, how does the current crisis and the current state of the world really impact the work that you're doing? What's some of the things that you're seeing from scholarship, from other folks that you're working with, or just general observations of your own that you have?
Well, one of the things is I think that this current crisis really highlights our dependency and interrelatedness on a planetary scale, whether we're talking about supply chains
Mhm.
or whether we're talking about bacteria and viruses that literally invade our bodies and we can't stop them from doing that. Our bodies we have a microbiome that makes up our whole body. So something like 1 in 10 cells is a human cell, and the rest of it are bacteria and critters that make up the flora and fauna of our individual bodies. And so
Mhm.
really medicine and also the humanities are starting to think of humans as these sort of ecosystems and relational creatures. So I think in part the crisis can help us to reflect on that a little bit more. Um, in the best scenario, it will help us reflect on that a little bit more. In the worst case scenario, it'll make us return to what's me and mine and sort of let's save us and let's shut in on ourselves.
Yeah, and I think you started hinting at this already, so understanding how there has been this impact on the way that we view ourselves as humans within this natural order. Like, why is that impact important, right? Like, what are these like short-term, long-term consequences of this type of thinking on both sides? I'd be really curious to get your perspective.
Well, I think maybe I can give one example. So my colleague and friend James Miller always says, it takes a planet to make a human, and what he means by that is we think of ourselves as humans, sort of we just sort of were born to parents, and that's where it begins. But really, it's a whole process of 4.5 billion years of planetary evolution. And before that, the expansion of the cosmos, right, for 13 point. So all of this goes. We need all of these circumstances that are outside of our control, even to make a human. So we can't think of the human without the planet. One example of the way we've done that, I think, is with our understanding of time. We think of time as by the watch and GMT and chronological, and we've literally enforced this chronological time over the face of the planet. That's only since the 19th century that this global time has been enforced. But when we think about it, we're rushing around day to day and we're following this clock, but these are not our biological clocks. This is not the clock of a bee. This is not the clock of a forest. This is not the clock of a river. The planet has a different times, and there are different times for different beings within the planet. And I think part of this pause in our rushing around, flying around, and meeting all the time, and commuting here and there, is giving us time to slow down and really recognize, the birds that are living in our backyard and their own sort of rhythms and cycles, and the rhythms and cycles of the day, and our own circadian rhythms. So I think that, this pause has given us a moment to say, hey, why are we rushing around doing all these things? It's not good for our bodies. It's not good for the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the reprieve the climate, for instance, has had since all of the planes have stopped and all of our rushing around has stopped.
Mm-hmm.
There's been something like a 5% reduction in carbon emissions. So
And I mean, so I think just to delve a little bit deeper in that, so you said from, and that's on like the more positive side, right? Like what these impacts for the planet and how we're interconnected with the planet. What happens if we go down this negative path, right? What are some of the short-term, long-term consequences of, if we don't learn our lessons, so to speak? Like, what do you think's potentially a possible outcome?
well, I think in part that path has already been charted, and that's business as usual. The fossil fueled world in which we live that literally allow us to live our daily lives in a way that outstrips the carrying capacity of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Because of fossil fuels, we can literally move across the world in less than 24 hours and move goods, services, information, this sort of thing. But is that sustainable to the planetary community? I think climate change and mass extinctions and droughts and warming and these sorts of things all say no. Bleaching of coral reefs, so on and so forth. I think this fossil fuel life that we've created, including our dreams, including what we think is possible with one single lifetime. If you can imagine 100 years ago, what our ancestors thought was possible in one lifetime versus what someone born today thinks is
Yeah.
possible, is that even sustainable within this planetary community? And I think not. And I think business as usual is that path that we were already on before this pandemic happened, which is let's just keep pumping the fossil fuels out, push it off to a later date, and that's been the policy. And I think that that could also continue. We could just try to go back to business as usual.
So, I mean, this very naturally begs the question, then where do we go from here, right? So if you're a young person and you're thinking about what's the future of this planet, what's the world I'm going to inherit, what's the world I'm going to lead, like, what's your advice? Like, what do we do? Where do we go from here?
Well, my advice, and this is in particular, I mean, because of the subject area that I study, but also because I'm a university professor, this is a perfect time for young people that are traditional college age to take a gap year. Follow the European lead and take a gap year. Take this time to think about not just what you can do to get a job to make money, but take this time to help to try and think about what you want to do, what type of world you want to live in. This was what was so powerful in the United States in the 50s and 60s, was that the GI Bill was passed, which allowed all these different people to go to college for the first time.
Mhm.
And also there wasn't the high healthcare cost and the high student loan costs. So people had time to stop and think and reflect upon the society they lived in and what they wanted. And then you have the civil rights movement, feminist movement, gay liberation movements, the environmental movement. All these movements start out of this ability for people to stop and pause and take stock of the world that they live in and think about what types of worlds they want to live in. So I would say take your time.
And so just kind of more, I guess, prescriptively, you mean to take that time to think about what impact you can have, right? What you could do to contribute back to society, or what you could do to contribute to activism, or any number of things. Is that right? Is that what you're leading?
That's part of it, but also just even a step before that, which is what kind of world do you want to help create?
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important question, where we all tend to work without, and we lose sight of this larger vision of what is this work doing to construct the world that we live in? Is it even in line with the goals that the type of world that I want to help foster? Right. So even taking a step back and just having that time to think about creatively possibilities for the way the world might be with your friends and other people around the planet.
And then any advice in terms of the kind of the business as usual path, like is there some sort of deviation that you might recommend there, or thoughts that you might have around how to maybe use this pause as a moment to extend some of the benefits towards the planetary ecosystem and self that we've just examined?
Right. I mean, I think some of it is being done for us through this pandemic. I think a lot of people have had the experience of, especially in the modern Western world, of having to do more things for yourself during this pandemic. So we're cooking and we're paying attention to what types of foods we're bringing to the household, where that food comes from. Right. There's crises in the supply chain. That should maybe give us pause and say, hey, maybe this sort of slowdown enables us to eat and live and breathe at a slower pace that's better for the communities that we live in and ultimately to the planetary network.
That's something we've been doing, right? A lot of cooking at home, a lot of, sourcing some of the stuff that we eat more locally. Well, this was really great. I think this was a really interesting way to think about not, the current state of beings and current state of being and where we want to go from here. I'll link a bunch of information to some of the work that Whitney's doing below, particularly Counterpoint Knowledge, which is an interesting project that starts to examine some of the world of academics through a more accessible eye. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And until next time, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.